In 1744, a child was born in one of the most restricted places in all of Europe. Not a prison, not a war zone. A street, literally one street, the Judengasse in Frankfurt, Germany. A narrow alley barely 3 meters wide, locked at night by iron gates. Flooded regularly by the River Main and home to over 3,000 people, crammed into a space designed for a few hundred. Jewish families in Frankfurt were not allowed to own land. They were not allowed to work most professions. They were not allowed to leave after dark. And they were taxed simply for being alive, simply for existing in that city. That child born in 1744 was Meyer Amschel Rothschild. And within his lifetime, he would turn those restrictions into an advantage that no one in history had ever found before. His father was a small money changer and trader, not wealthy, not powerful, just surviving. When his father died, Meyer was sent to work as an apprentice at a banking firm in Hanover. He was young, he was sharp, and he learned everything he could about finance, about currency exchange, about how money moved between cities and across borders. But what he noticed more than anything else was this. The people with real power were not the merchants, not even the bankers. The people with real power were the ones who controlled the finances of royalty. So Meyer Rothschild went back to Frankfurt with one single goal. He was going to become the financial agent of a prince. He started small, incredibly small, selling rare coins and antique medals to collectors. One of those collectors was a minor German nobleman named Wilhelm of Hesse. Meyer was patient, persistent, and genuinely skilled. He gave Wilhelm good deals. He found rare pieces that nobody else could locate. And slowly, over years of careful relationship building, he earned Wilhelm's trust. By the 1780s, Meyer Amschel Rothschild had been appointed as the official financial agent of Wilhelm of Hesse, one of the wealthiest princes in all of the German states. This was not luck. This was a strategy executed over 2 decades. And it was just the beginning. Wilhelm of Hesse made most of his fortune in a particularly dark business. He rented out his own soldiers to foreign governments. Britain, in particular, paid enormous sums to hire Hessian troops to fight in wars across the world, including the American Revolutionary War. This meant that Wilhelm regularly received very large sums of money that needed to be managed, invested, and moved discreetly. Meyer Rothschild became the man who did exactly that. And in doing so, he learned something that would define his family's strategy for generations. The real business was not trading goods. The real business was moving money for people who had too much of it and needed someone completely trustworthy to handle it invisibly. Meyer had 5 sons. And he did something that no banking family had ever done systematically before. He sent each son to a different major European city. Amschel stayed in Frankfurt to manage the home base. Salomon went to Vienna, the capital of the Habsburg Empire. Nathan went to London, the rising center of global finance. Karl went to Naples, gateway to Mediterranean trade. And James went to Paris, the cultural and political capital of Europe. 5 cities, 5 brothers, 1 family, 1 network, 1 set of rules. They communicated by private courier, faster than any government postal system. They shared information about markets, about political movements, about which governments were about to go to war, about which currencies were about to collapse. In a world where information took weeks to travel, the Rothschilds had information in days. That was their first and most decisive advantage, not wealth, not connections. Information, arriving faster than anyone else's. When Meyer Amschel Rothschild died in 1812, he left behind something unprecedented. Not just money, a system, a pan-European financial network, controlled entirely by one family, bound by loyalty, by shared interest, and by blood. And the world was about to give that network the opportunity it had been waiting for. His son Nathan, sitting in London, was about to make a move that would shock the entire continent and make the Rothschild name immortal. By 1813, Europe had been at war for over 20 years. Napoleon Bonaparte had torn the continent apart, redrawn every border, toppled every throne he could reach, and built an empire that stretched from Spain to the borders of Russia. And every government fighting him was running out of money. Britain was the main financier of the coalition against Napoleon. The British government needed to move enormous sums of gold to Wellington's army, fighting in Spain and Portugal. But moving gold across a continent controlled by Napoleon's forces was nearly impossible. Any shipment could be intercepted. Any route was dangerous. Nathan Rothschild in London proposed a solution. He would handle the transfer himself, through his network. Not by physically moving gold across enemy territory, by using the family's financial connections in Paris, in Frankfurt, and Amsterdam, to convert funds, to transfer credit, to make money appear in the right place at the right time, without a single coin crossing a French checkpoint. The British government agreed, and Nathan delivered. He moved the equivalent of hundreds of millions in today's money to Wellington's forces with a speed and a discretion that no one else could match. The British military stayed funded. The campaign continued, and Nathan Rothschild had just demonstrated to the most powerful government on earth that his network was not just useful. It was essential. But the real moment that changed everything came in June 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. Napoleon had escaped from exile, rebuilt his army, and marched north. The fate of Europe depended on the outcome of a single battle in Belgium. Every investor in London was paralyzed with uncertainty. If Napoleon won, British government bonds would collapse in value overnight. If Wellington won, they would surge. The entire London financial market was frozen, waiting for news. News that would take at least 2 days to arrive by normal channels. Nathan Rothschild had his own couriers, his own network, and he received news of Wellington's victory a full day before the British government did. What he did next has been debated by historians for 2 centuries. According to the most widely documented account, Nathan went to the London Stock Exchange, and he started selling British government bonds. When other traders saw Nathan Rothschild selling, they panicked. They assumed he knew something terrible had happened, that Napoleon had won. Everyone started selling. Bond prices collapsed. And then, quietly, through agents spread across the floor of the exchange, Nathan Rothschild began buying everything at the bottom of the market. When the official news of Wellington's victory arrived the following day, bond prices surged back to their previous levels and beyond. Nathan Rothschild had multiplied his fortune many times over in a single day. In one move, using superior information and an understanding of crowd psychology, he had turned the most important military event in a generation into personal wealth. Whether every detail of that story is precisely accurate is still debated. But what is not debated is the outcome. By 1815, Nathan Rothschild was the most powerful private banker in Britain. And through Britain, which was becoming the dominant global power, the most powerful private banker in the world. He was 38 years old. The British government now owed the Rothschilds an enormous debt, financial and political. And Nathan knew exactly how to collect on it. He became the primary dealer in British government bonds. Every time Britain needed to raise money for a war, for infrastructure, for expansion, it went through Nathan Rothschild. He was not a member of the British government. He held no official title, no seat in Parliament. But no major financial decision in the British Empire was made without consulting him. That is a form of power that most people never see, and never think to look for, because it does not announce itself. It does not need to. By the middle of the 19th century, the British Empire was the largest and most powerful empire the world had ever seen. At its peak, it controlled over 25% of the Earth's land surface and over 400 million people, roughly a quarter of the entire human population. And behind almost every major financial operation that built and maintained that empire was the House of Rothschild. Let us look at specific examples, because the scale of this is difficult to absorb abstractly. In 1835, the British government needed to pay compensation to slave owners following the abolition of slavery in the British Empire. The total sum was £20 million, an enormous amount for the time, roughly equivalent to 40% of the entire British government's annual budget. The government borrowed that money through the Rothschilds. That loan was so large that it was not fully repaid until 2015. British taxpayers were still paying off a Rothschild loan arranged in 1835 until just 11 years ago. In 1854, Britain entered the Crimean War against Russia. The war was expensive and unexpected. The government needed funds quickly. The Rothschilds arranged the financing. In 1871, after the Franco-Prussian War, France needed to pay a massive war indemnity to the newly unified German state. 5 billion francs. An amount so large that most financial experts believed it would take France decades to pay. The Rothschilds organized the loan. France paid the indemnity in under 3 years. That financial performance alone cemented the family's reputation as the only institution capable of moving sums that governments themselves could not manage. But the most significant single transaction of the 19th century may have been what happened in November 1875. The British Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, received intelligence that the Egyptian Khedive was desperate for money and was about to sell his shares in the Suez Canal Company to a French syndicate. The Suez Canal had only been open for 6 years, but it had already transformed global trade, cutting the journey from Britain to India by thousands of miles, eliminating the need to sail around the entire continent of Africa. Whoever controlled the Suez Canal controlled the main artery of the British Empire. Disraeli wanted those shares. He needed £4 million immediately. Parliament was not in session. There was no time for a government vote or a formal approval. Disraeli sent a message to Lionel de Rothschild, Nathan's son, who now ran the London house. He needed £4 million by tomorrow. Lionel asked one question: "What is your security?" Disraeli's reply became one of the most quoted lines in British financial history. The British government. Lionel de Rothschild reached across his desk, picked up a grape from a bowl of fruit, ate it slowly, and said simply, "You shall have it." The next morning, £4 million was transferred to the Egyptian government. Britain acquired 44% of the Suez Canal Company, a stake it would hold for 80 years, until Egypt nationalized the canal in 1956. That single overnight loan changed the geopolitical map of the world. Without the Rothschilds, France likely acquires those shares. The balance of power in the Mediterranean and in the route to India shifts completely. The entire trajectory of British imperial history pivots on one man eating a grape and deciding to lend £4 million before breakfast. That is what financial power at that level actually looks like. Not armies, not speeches, a phone call, a decision. Money moving overnight. And the British Empire was not the only beneficiary of the Rothschild network. The family financed the construction of railways across Europe and North America. They financed the De Beers Diamond Mining Company in South Africa. They financed the early development of the oil industry through Royal Dutch Shell. They were lenders to the Vatican, to the Ottoman Empire, to the Brazilian government. By the 1870s, the Rothschild family's combined wealth was estimated to be equivalent to roughly $2 trillion in today's money, making them not just the wealthiest family in Europe, but almost certainly the wealthiest private family in the history of the world up to that point. And they had built all of it not through conquest, not through inheritance of land, but through information, through trust, through the strategic deployment of credit at exactly the moments when governments were most desperate and most vulnerable. There's a version of history that is taught in schools. It talks about kings and generals, about elections and treaties, about wars and revolutions. And then there is the version that becomes visible when you follow the money. Those two versions of history do not always tell the same story. The Rothschild family operated almost entirely in the second version. Let us look at 3 moments where their financial decisions shaped political history in ways that most history books either miss entirely or mention only in passing. The first is the American Civil War. By 1861, the United States was tearing itself apart. The Union government in Washington needed enormous sums of money to fund the war effort. Europe's major banking houses were deciding which side to support, or whether to support either. The Rothschilds, through their American contacts and through August Belmont, their official agent in New York, were deeply involved in financing Union war bonds. At the same time, Confederate agents were in Europe trying to secure their own financing. The Rothschilds declined to support the Confederacy. This was not purely a moral decision. though the family's opposition to slavery was genuine and documented. It was also a strategic one. They believed the Union would win. And they were right. Their financial support helped the Union government maintain credit markets during the most expensive war in American history up to that point. The second moment is the creation of the modern state of Israel. In November 1917, the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, wrote a letter to Walter Rothschild, the second Baron Rothschild, the leader of the British Jewish community. That letter became known as the Balfour Declaration. It stated that the British government viewed with favor the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. It was addressed personally to a Rothschild because the family had spent decades lobbying the British government for exactly this outcome. Walter's father, Nathaniel Rothschild, had been the first Jewish member of the British House of Lords. The family had the access, the relationships, and the credibility to make that request in a way that no other Jewish institution in Britain could at that time. That letter, written to a Rothschild, set in motion the chain of events that would lead 30 years later to the founding of the State of Israel in 1948. Whatever your political view of that outcome, the historical fact is undeniable. A private banking family received a letter that changed the map of the Middle East. The third moment is what happened in Europe between 1914 and 1945. The two world wars devastated the Rothschild family in ways that are rarely discussed. The Austrian branch lost almost everything when the Nazis annexed Austria in 1938. Louis von Rothschild was arrested by the Gestapo and held for over a year, before being released in exchange for handing over his family's steel and coal industries. The French branch was forced to flee when Germany occupied Paris. Their properties, their art collections, their businesses were seized. After the war, some assets were recovered. Many were not. The family had spent over a century building financial infrastructure across Europe. The Holocaust and the Second World War dismantled significant portions of it permanently. This is a part of the Rothschild story that the conspiracy theories never mention, because it does not fit the narrative of an all-powerful family controlling everything. The most powerful private banking dynasty in history could not stop the most destructive event in the history of the continent where they had built everything. That is a humbling and important thing to understand about financial power. It is enormous. It is real. It shapes history in ways most people never see, but it has limits. And those limits become visible in the most extreme moments. After 1945, the Rothschild family rebuilt, quietly, patiently, exactly the way they had built everything the first time, through relationships, through discretion, through an understanding of information and of what governments and institutions need when they are most vulnerable. The Rothschild empire of the 19th century no longer exists in its original form. The family deliberately restructured their business throughout the 20th century in ways that reduced their visibility without reducing their influence. In 1960, the various national branches of the family began consolidating into a more unified corporate structure. In 2003, the French and British arms of the family business were merged into a single entity, Rothschild & Co., now headquartered in Paris. Today, Rothschild & Co. is a major international financial advisory firm. It advises on mergers and acquisitions, on government debt restructuring, on privatizations, and on corporate strategy for large companies and governments. In 2022, the family took the company private again, delisting it from the Paris Stock Exchange, removing it from public financial reporting, returning to the model of discretion that Meyer Amschel Rothschild had established in the Frankfurt ghetto 250 years ago. The current estimated net worth of the Rothschild family as a whole is difficult to calculate precisely. Estimates range from several $billions to significantly more, depending on what assets and structures are included. But here is the more important question. What does the Rothschild story actually teach us about how financial power works? The first lesson is that information advantage is worth more than capital. Nathan Rothschild did not win at Waterloo because he had more money than everyone else. He won because he had information first, and he understood how to use it while everyone around him was paralyzed by uncertainty. In every era of history, the people who control information flows have been the people who controlled financial outcomes. That principle has not changed. Only the technology through which information moves has changed. The second lesson is that the most powerful financial institutions are the ones that governments cannot afford to lose. The Rothschilds became powerful by making themselves indispensable to governments at exactly the moments when those governments were most desperate. Once a government has borrowed from you to fight a war, to pay a debt, or to buy a canal, you have leverage that no law can easily remove. Because cutting you off means cutting off access to future financing. And governments always need future financing. The third lesson is that financial power is most effective when it is invisible. The Rothschilds never sought public office. They rarely made public statements. They did not need to. Their power operated through relationships, through credit, through the quiet understanding between the people who needed money and the people who could provide it. That model of invisible influence is not unique to the Rothschilds. It is the model used by dynasties from the Medici to the present day. And the fourth lesson is perhaps the most uncomfortable one. Financial power is not permanent. It is not invincible. The most powerful private banking family lost enormous portions of their empire to the irrational violence of a political ideology. The Rothschild story is not a conspiracy. It is documented in thousands of letters, in government records, in financial histories. It is the story of what happens when a family combines intelligence, discipline, and a multi-generational strategy applied consistently over 250 years. The result was the most consequential private financial institution in the history of the world. And its story is a lens through which you can understand how financial power has always actually worked. Not through what is announced publicly, but through what is decided privately, between the people who need money and those who have it. That is the world that Wealth of Empires exists to show you. Subscribe, because the next video goes deeper into another dynasty, another hidden network, another story of money and power. You will not want to miss it.